Welcome back to another edition of Mystic Mage Mead. Today, we're going to make an Acerglyn. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's right. We're going to use some maple syrup. Obviously some other ingredients. We're going to make something delicious. Honey. I'm going to use about 2.5 pounds of honey. About 12 ounces of that grade A maple syrup. Just a little splash of lime juice. These are black tea bags. I'm going to throw 2 of those in there. And try not to spill brown sugar. So we'll give it a nice flavor, make it a nice dark colored mead, which is perfect. You know, it won't be anything like a coffee mill, but it will still be dark. Hopefully this will come out to, after it's done, 12%, but anything within that ballpark is just fine. Let's get started. First, I'm going to pour the honey, and there's a reason I do that. Because I actually take one of the honey containers and put the yeast in it with some water. That way the yeast have something to eat while they rehydrate. In another video I said that you don't need to rehydrate, but I do it anyway. It's just a habit of mine, so we'll let those drip in there. Honey is obviously a little viscous, very viscous, so it takes a while to come out, but this will be perfect. Now, I'm doing 1 gallon. So this pack, this little tiny pack, can do 5 gallons. I'm gonna use half a pack. When I first did it, my very first time, I did 1/5 of a pack. Well, didn't turn out too well. It just wasn't enough yeast, because this colony of yeast has to actually build up. Now, I could pitch this whole pack. I could put 10 of these packs in and it'd be just fine. It would just be a waste of money. So, the last thing you want to do is waste money. Speaking of which, I'm going to take this other one and I'm just going to transfer that, just so that when I do pour it, I get all of that honey in there. And this isn't so much honey that the yeast are gonna, you know, choke on it and not be able to handle it. It'll be just fine rehydrating in that amount. So while that rehydrates, we'll set that aside. I'm gonna go ahead and take 2 ounces of brown sugar. Now this is a dark brown sugar, so nothing special. Just dark brown cane sugar. And lastly, I'm going to go ahead and put in the grade A maple syrup. Now, I know I'm not going to get everything out of here. I'm going to try, but I'm not going to sit here for 15 minutes with you watching. So I just put in a smidge extra, knowing that I wasn't going to get it all. Just a splash. Just give it a little bittering agent, because there's a lot of really thick, sweet agents in here. We don't want that to get to be too much. Now, I'm not going to put the tea bag in just yet. First, I have hot water, not a whole lot, as you can see. Now I just got a spoon out of the drawer, but I have some sanitizing water right here. Every time you use something that you haven't sanitized with Star San or another sanitizer, you always want to make sure to use that. I'm just going to mix this up real well. Ooh, it smells really good. Now, I could put this right in my carboy and shake it up, but I kind of have a little, not phobia, but PTSD from glass breaking. It's happened to me more than once. About a year ago, I was cleaning out a 5-gallon glass carboy, which is, well, imagine this, but 5 gallons. And I put some Star San into it, probably about a gallon, and was shaking it up. Well, guess what? It slipped. Now, I was barefoot in my garage, so it was literally half a foot above the ground, but it's heavy. So what did it do? It shattered, cut my foot open, not bad, but I lost a bunch of glass. They're not cheap, so I'll do whatever I can to avoid breaking any more. Next thing I'm going to do is put some water in here, actually. So give me just one sec. You're going to continue hearing me talk. So I'm using my tap water. You can use distilled water or preferably spring water. But it's much better to use spring water. I use my tap water because I know there's nothing wrong with it, and it works fine for me. My meads come out tasting pretty good. Now, when I put the yeast in here, I forgot to mention that I use warm water, not scalding hot. It's probably about 100 degrees, which is perfect to get the yeast going. On every pack, it should tell you, or you can also Google it and find out what all the specs of your yeast are, how it attenuates the sugars that you want it to ferment. Let me get some of the last sugars out of here, speaking of sugar. It'll tell you what temperature to pitch it at. Usually it's always about 90 to 100 degrees. It'll tell you what temperature to ferment at. Room temperature is always pretty perfect. Some yeast will ferment with a 50-degree temperature range, anywhere from, like, say, 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Some maybe anywhere between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. It all depends on the strain. The yeast I'm using right now, I think, it doesn't say it on the pack, but I think it's anywhere between like, I don't know, 55 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit is where you can actually ferment without there being any issues. Some won't ferment if you go beyond that temperature range, and then you're just wasting time. So now I'm going to add my black tea bags. Hopefully I can fit this in here. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to shake this up just a little bit. I stick my finger through that hole. All right, welcome back. So I was just about to shake this up. Like I said, I do have some PTSD from glass breaking, but I can actually grab the bottom of this thing and make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. Now, what I want to do is put that in there and get it just above the gallon line, right about here. So I'm just going to add a little more water. Now, I was going to measure with a hydrometer and a graduated cylinder, but I want to add this in there just because if I do it without the yeast being in there, although that'd probably be ideal, I wouldn't get an accurate reading. It might be a few points off, I don't know, and that would affect the potential alcohol that I'll actually get, and I want to know exactly what that, or ballpark what that's going to be. So, like I said, before we go ahead and use graduated cylinder and turkey baster, okay, now that is a little less than I wanted, so I'm going to shake it up one more time just so I get everything mixed in there. The last thing you want to have is a bunch of honey or whatever your sugar content is going to be at the bottom. So basically I'm going to do about 4 of these, which will get the graduated cylinder filled up enough to where the hydrometer will go in and give a reading and float. And of course I'll show you that as well. like to give it a spin. That way I know it's going to settle to where it needs to be and hopefully clear out any foam that's trying to get around it. Now it looks like it is 1.122, which is fine actually. Of course I miscalculated, so I originally thought that this would be 12%. It looks like it'll probably hit anywhere between 15 and 16%. Of course, that is if the yeast were able to get to that. Now, Acerglyn D47, the yeast I used, can only, I shouldn't say can, has an alcohol tolerance of 14%. Yeast can be unpredictable. They don't know how to read the labels, so it might go to 15, it might go to 13, it might hit 14 exactly. I don't know. If it hits 14 and there's residual sweetness left over, awesome. If it doesn't and goes lower and there's even more, cool. If it goes all the way to 15 or all the way to dry, all you have to do is just take more honey, or if you want, we could take a little bit of honey and a little bit of maple syrup and back sweeten, which would just be adding after the yeast have worked to their potential and either died off naturally or had potassium metabisulfite and potassium sorbate added to make sure that they can't re-ferment. So I'm fine with either possibility. I'll work with it. So you could drink this. I wouldn't recommend it. There's live yeast in there. I mean, you could drink a little yeast. It's not going to kill you, but I mean, this is like insanely sweet. It's just going to kind of be nasty the way it is. Okay, so I have my stopper here. Just going to plug that in. And of course, over here, which you can't see, it's just a little tray with star sand solution in it. Now, if a little drops in there, that's fine. Now, this is a 3-piece airlock. That's what it's called. When I first started my very first mead I made, the airlock, I didn't know how to use it. I just put it in there. No water, no whatever. It didn't hurt it because when a mead starts out, all the CO2 is coming up. I don't really have bugs, but if I did, they'd probably try to get in there and probably would be successful. What this device does is let the water sit here, or star sand, and there's a reason that's there, is so it can kill anything that does manage to get its way in before it gets inside the brew. But basically it's a little device that allows air to only leave, nothing to come in. So if you don't have one of these, you probably shouldn't be having a brew. I would get one, super cheap, the 3-piece, it's like $1. And you can reuse it over and over and over. I don't think I've had one break yet. This bung right here, that's what this is called, it's the bung. And of course, as far as your brew goes, you have your Acerglyn, Acerglyn, I want to say it's spelled. Of course, you'll see it on the title of the video anyway, but you're going to see your head or your Croissant line. Of course, your brew, your yeast are going to get really active in here. And then at the bottom, after it's done fermenting, you're going to see a lot of particles fall to the bottom. That's all, well, it's called lees, but it's mainly just dead or dormant yeast. Some particles from your brew, which is fine. When you transfer over to your next brew, it's called racking. Basically, it's transferring from one vessel to another, leaving behind the lees and whatever you can from the top. Usually this is gone after it's done fermenting. Now you'll know it's done when the bubbles stop and you take a reading with your hydrometer right here. When your hydrometer says one thing and you check 3 days later or 5 days later and it's the exact same thing, it's done. You can take your primary fermentation and rack it to your secondary. That's normally where I add my sulfates and sorbates. That kills the yeast and stops any production. And then I like to add some